For centuries, the word witch could destroy you. You didn't need to summon spirits or stir a cauldron. Sometimes, all it took was being a woman who lived by her own knowledge. A midwife delivering children without a priest's blessing. A healer learning from the land instead of the church. To them, that was dangerous enough. A witch was power they couldn't govern. Power that came from within, not from the altar. In this video, we'll uncover why the witch became the perfect enemy, how fear was turned into law, and what the church really saw when it looked at women who walked their own path. If you value uncovering truths that history tried to bury, subscribe to Vortex Mythology, and give this video a like to support the journey. Now, let's begin. The medieval world didn't open with witch burnings. For centuries, folk healers and midwives worked openly. Their remedies mixed herbal knowledge with prayers, blessings, and seasonal rites. They were neither saints nor outcasts. They were a part of the fabric of village life. The shift began in the late 15th century. Europe was in turmoil. Plagues had hollowed cities, famines had ripped the land bare, and the Reformation cracked the church's authority in half. Fear needed a new focus. In 1484, Pope Vincent VIII issued the Bull Summis Disserantes Effectibus, declaring witchcraft a heresy that threatened the salvation of souls. Soon after, Inquisitors Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Springer published the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. This book wasn't simply theological theory. It was a manual for hunting, interrogating, and condemning witches. It described in excessive detail the supposed crimes of witches, from causing storms to killing infants, and insisted that they must be eradicated for the safety of Christendom. Most importantly, it insisted that witches were more often women. Why? Because it claimed women were weaker in faith, more impressionable, and more carnal. With this, the church had its framework. The witch was both a spiritual danger and a gendered threat. And once the church had a manual that told people exactly what a witch looked like, it didn't take long for that picture to focus in on one face more than any other. From the very beginning, witchcraft was treated as a woman's crime. Historians estimate that in early modern Europe, 75 to 85% of the accused were female. The logic was self-reinforcing. In a patriarchal society, women were already viewed as morally fragile and in need of male guidance. If a woman lived alone, spoke her mind, or possessed skills the church couldn't sanctio, midwifery, herbalism, dream interpretation, suspicion followed. It didn't take much. A failed harvest could spark whispers about a woman who had looked strangely at the fields. A sudden illness might be blamed on the neighbor who refused to attend mass. Children who misbehaved could claim they'd been bewitched, and their testimony was often enough to bring arrest. Once accused, a woman was trapped. Denial could often be seen as proof of craftiness. Silence was treated as guilt. Confession, often extracted under torture, sealed her fate. And because trials rarely required physical evidence beyond rumor or marks on the body, conviction rates were high. The message was clear. A woman who held power outside the church's authority, even the quiet local power of healing, was vulnerable. And while these accusations often began as a personal grudge or village gossip, they were part of something far larger. Because whispers about crops failing or a strange look from a neighbor weren't the whole story. The deeper truth is that these hunts were also about shifting power and who got left standing when the rules changed. The witch trials weren't only a war on women's spirituality, they're also a weapon of political and economic change. In her work, Caliban and the Witch, scholar Silvia Federici shows how the most intense witch-hunting waves in the 16th and 17th centuries coincided with the rise of capitalism in Europe. Feudal systems were collapsing. Land that had been shared in common was being seized and enclosed. Rural women, once able to support themselves through communal farming, brewing, or midwifery, were pushed out of those roles. The Church's alliance with emerging state powers meant that suppressing witchcraft also meant suppressing women's economic independence. Property belonging to convicted witches was often confiscated. In 1627, in the German town of Würzburg, a midwife named Margareta Gußbäckerin was accused of witchcraft after a series of infant deaths. Under torture, she confessed to serving the devil. When she was executed, her small home, garden, and livestock were seized by the city council and sold to a wealthy merchant. Her tools and herbal manuals, the core of her livelihood, were burned in the public square. Entire trades were restructured to favor the male guilds and exclude female practitioners. The knowledge of birth control herbs, for example, was branded as diabolical, removing control over reproduction from women and placing it in the hands of patriarchal institutions. So when a healer was burned, it wasn't only her body that was turned to ash. It was the network of skills, relationships, and independence that she carried. But erasing women's independence in the shadows wasn't enough. The Church needed the public to watch, to feel, to believe. And fear spreads faster when people can see it. So the hunt for witches became a kind of theatre, with props, costumes, and images burned into the public mind. Fear needed symbols, and the Church, aided by artists, pamphleteers, and preachers, gave them shape. The witch's mark became one of the most invasive tools of persecution. Believed to be a sign of a pact with the devil, it could be any mole, scar, or birthmark. Accused women were stripped, shaved, and examined in humiliating public searches. If the mark didn't bleed when pricked, it was proof of guilt. Illustrations in early printed books portrayed witches as grotesque hags flying through the night, dancing in circles with demons, or suckling animals known as familiars. These images weren't harmless fantasy. They trained the public to see certain types of women as dangerous before they ever stood trial. Sabbath stories where witches supposedly met under the full moon to worship the devil reinforced the idea that these women acted as a counter-church. The more monstrous the imagery, the more justifiable the punishment. And yet, buried beneath the fear was a strange recognition. The witch was powerful, dangerous enough to threaten kingdoms, potent enough to be worth burning. The witch trials were about more than magic. They were about controlling who could speak to the divine. Long before Christianity, women held sacred roles as oracles, priestesses, and midwives of both birth and death. They tended to the cycles of planting, healing, and mourning. Their authority came not from hierarchy, but from relationship with the land, the body, and the unseen. To the medieval church, this was an alternate path to God. It didn't need priests, sacraments, or tithes. It didn't require loyalty to Rome. And because much of it was unwritten, it couldn't be seized or censored in the same way as books. By framing this intuitive, embodied wisdom as witchcraft, the church absorbed what it could into its own rituals and destroyed what it couldn't. Healing became the domain of licensed male physicians. Prophecy became the privilege of canonized saints. The sacred became something you accessed through the altar, not the forest. And in trying to crush that older way of knowing, the church accidentally gave birth to a figure that would survive it. Not in flesh, but in story. Over centuries, the witch stopped being just a legal category and became an archetype. She was made to embody everything the church feared: sensuality, chaos, independence, and a refusal to submit. She was the shadow in every sermon, the cautionary tales mothers told their daughters, the whisper that too much knowledge could kill you. But archetypes can't be fully erased. The more the church tried to destroy her, the more she settled into cultural memory. In folk tales, in whispered charms, in the stories told at the edge of the fire. Even now, the word witch stirs a reaction. For some, it still carries centuries of fear. For others, it's become a banner, a way of reclaiming the intuition, the sensuality, and the ungoverned wisdom the trials tried to stamp out. Which is why the witch isn't stuck in the past. She's still here, woven into how we talk about women, powers, and dangers, even when we don't realize it. Witch hunts no longer fill the town square with executions, but that echo is still here. We see it in the silencing of women who challenge authority, in the dismissal of intuition as irrational, in the way healing traditions outside the medical establishment are ridiculed or regulated out of existence. So when a woman is called irrational for trusting her intuition, is that echo really gone? The real fear the church carried was never about curses or cauldrons. It was about losing its monopoly on the sacred. Because if people could find the divine in the herbs at their feet, in the moon above, in the quiet knowing within themselves, they didn't need a priest to stand in the middle. So the witch was never just a villain in the forest. She was the embodiment of a memory that power can be rooted in the earth, spoken in the language of cycles, and carried in the body of a woman. The church may have tried to burn her name from the records, but she lives on in the stories we tell, maybe in the gardens we plant, community, time in nature, and the moments we trust our inner voice without asking permission. Tell us in the comments, when you hear the word witch, what's the image that comes to mind? And if this story spoke to you, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.